Hello, everybody. It is August 29th, 2023, and welcome to the Operator Framework Working Group meeting. My name is Daniel, and I'll be running the meeting today. I'm going to get right into our agenda for today, starting with, looks like we have a couple briefs to go over. Today appears to be the lazy consensus state for the RBAC permissions management document. Would any of the authors like to speak about this before we move on?
It looks like it's in the ready state. I don't know, Andy, if you moved it to ready already.
I put it in ready because it just seemed, I think maybe the distinction between under review and ready and approval seemed a bit strange. So
Okay.
that was really why I did it, because it hasn't been approved.
Are you looking for any more reviews?
Nope. Made the announcement last week. So
Yeah.
good.
I personally haven't seen a lot, if any, comments on it. So I don't know whether that means no one looked or whether no one has comments, but it seems like we gave notice. So in my mind,
Yep.
we're good to move on then. That's
Okay.
the lazy part of the consensus, I guess.
Yep. Approved.
All right. I'll go on to the next one. We have a brief on OLM v1 documentation. Consensus date is September 8th. Anik, would you like to talk about this one at all, or?
Yeah, not about this one specifically. I think the writings over there kind of speaks clearly. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah.
But I think the statement that Joe made, I wanted to add something there. I know it's already been changed to approve, and I'm not saying anything about changing that status back, but if it's worth considering the fact that the reason that we moved our so the OLM V1 documentation had an earlier consensus date, but then we moved it back and we announced it in the Slack channel. And I guess there are a couple of other briefs or RFCs that has to go through the same process. The reason was that we had a lot of interrupts in the form of people getting sick or hurricanes coming through or people getting their basements flooded and stuff. So maybe that played into the process of you guys not seeing that much comments. But if it is approved, it is approved. And at least for the V1 documentation, the latest update is we've moved the consensus date slightly back so that we have time to look at the comments. And anybody else who wants to comment on that.
Sounds like there's no comments at the moment.
Okay, we can
Yeah.
move on to the one.
All right, and then we have another RFC here for initial upgrade support, the resolver updates. Mikola is on PTO, I believe. Is there anybody else here that can speak to this?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. Alex. So Nikolai has been working on this. I know he added some changes that Jordan had requested, and then he made a couple of larger changes to the layout. And he was just requesting that the change document get some reviews. He decided to push out the consensus state to account for those new changes in his vacation. He plans to be back this week and to respond to any comments that are raised. So if you could just look at that, that'd be great.
Awesome. then if there are no other comments on the RFCs, we can get into our topics. Yeah, so we closed this milestone for RuckPack. Last week, I created the new milestone for the next version to release. There's nothing in there yet, so yeah, we can skip that when we do the check-in. Was there anything else you wanted to say on this, Alex?
Nope.
Cool. But then for the next topic, to clean up the DEPI milestone, anything you want to say there, or is that just self-explanatory?
It's relatively self-explanatory. I think we'll probably refashion some of the DEPI stuff to account for some changes that Pear's planning to introduce. And since Pear's been the, source of truth for a lot of the DEPI zone work, we're just going to close out issues in the current V0.1.0 DEPI milestone, and then probably pull in some items that he's been thinking about. So if you want to be included, you can look at what channel is that? That's the DEPI dev channel in the Kubernetes Slack instance. And if you want to be involved in that conversation, we'll kick the conversation off there.
Sounds good. And then we have another agenda item from you for the operator controller, issue 370.
Yeah. So this one's super simple. We talked about this last week. We were talking about reformatting the working group agenda. Some of those changes were already pulled in at the previous working group meeting. And what I did was, since we had adopted the proposed changes in 370, I just marked it as closed, mentioned that we updated the template for this meeting, and then I created a new issue 370 that spawned from that discussion about how we should run the working group. Basically the conversation around how do we make sure that we close our issues or stale issues in our repositories. How do we want to do that? Like the general sentiment of the people that were involved in that conversation is captured in the ticket. So what this will focus on is just like, hey, how do we want to close stale issues, more or less? How do we want to do issue triaging? So yeah, that's, look at that. If you have ideas on how we could best, triage and close issues, that would be, this is the spot to share that feedback.
Awesome. Thanks for starting that conversation. Anybody have comments before I move on? All right, Anik, you have a topic here on tracking the docs updates.
Yes. So I was looking through the issues that got closed after the doc site was bootstrapped, and it looked like at least there was one issue that requires doc updates. Wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page about how we are tracking docs work. So basically there's like two proposals. Either we start attaching docs needed label to any issue that we think will require a doc change, which means whenever the work is delivered, it is delivered along with the doc update. And that is also the original intention behind putting the docs repository inside the original repository itself, unlike the V0 repository where the Hugo website is separate, in a separate repo. But because that means sometimes we increase the scope of the work, and that might not be favorable for planning purpose and stuff, we could also create separate issues that we include in the milestone, but the original issue is not blocked by this. In any case, either way we decide to go, I think we should start thinking consciously about how we want to track docs. And I opened up an issue for this one that the docs should be updated following 342 being done, which switched the packages and bundle metadata API from that to the catalog metadata API.
Joe, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think it might be a good idea to make sure we capture that in the brief for the doc stuff, because that seems like where we want to kind of collect all the implications of any of the docs work. In general, my suggestion would probably be like, let's be lightweight about it, and maybe we put something in the PR template that says like, do you need to do docs updates, just as a reminder. But I don't want to say like you must always update docs for every single PR that could possibly have a docs change, but I also don't want to always say that it's okay to neglect the docs in a PR. So to me, it seems like it's more of a case by case. When someone's authoring a PR or doing a review for a PR, it's okay for someone to say, yep, I think we should merge docs at the same time or not. But separately, like the way that we've got docs right now, and this is why I say it should go into the brief, but the way that we're doing docs right now, like there's something in the root doc site that is about catalog D APIs. And I think that was sort of the example here. It's like, well, that's sort of something that should go in the catalog D repo, and things get weird with that. So I think like separately as part of the brief, we need to say like, here's how we update the individual repo docs versus the pristine, nice persona user story based website. But I would imagine, and I think we said this in the brief, that like eventually we think that like larger over like all-encompassing website is in a separate repo, in which case the process is essentially like we update the docs per repo that are more reference-based docs or whatever, and then there's a follow-on update to the persona concept-based website. But anyway, I guess my point is like, let's try to write down what we think we want to do in the brief and capture it there.
Okay, I can include a paragraph about this and start the discussion there.
Awesome. Anything else on this topic? If not, Joe, I saw you added a topic here on the removing the package and bundle metadata APIs.
Yep. So Nikolai merged, I think late last week, number 343 in operator controller, which is the second bullet there, to remove any use of those APIs in the core controllers for operator controller. So now operator controller uses the catalog metadata API. So as a result, I was like, okay, well, it seems like a good time to go and just remove the bundle metadata and package APIs, because nothing is using that anymore. And the way that catalog D works right now is it's syncing to all three APIs. So it just takes a lot more time to unpack. And now that nothing is using it, like it doesn't really make sense. We've known for a while that we want to get rid of it. So I opened catalog D 149 to go ahead and just delete all of those APIs from catalog D and stop syncing them, obviously. And then in the process, I noticed that there are still a few more straggler bits in operator controller that reference bundle metadata and or package APIs, mainly in the tests.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got 372 open to also remove those last little bits. So just basically this is like a FYI, we're planning to remove these. If anyone disagrees, then let us know. But I think this is like the set of PRs that need to merge to get us to be fully out of the package and bundle metadata API game. So reviews are welcome. I think I've already gotten approval on 149, but 372 I just pushed up a few minutes ago. Looks like everything passed, but I need some eyes on it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll take a look after this as well. Thanks, Joe. Andy, I see a topic here on Ruckpack V1 Alpha 2.
Yes, so Joe and I have been talking, and I mentioned this in Slack a couple of weeks ago about some ideas for iterating on the Ruckpack APIs. So this is a proposal for what an Alpha 2 could look like. And I'm not necessarily ready to start lazy consensus yet, but I would like to try and take a fairly lightweight and lean approach to working on this. My ask would be that we don't discuss this to death, and that as long as it looks like we're proceeding in generally the right direction, after some discussion, we agree, hopefully, to proceed. And that this is just a stepping stone on the way to something that is more GA. The idea here is that we're moving, or I'm proposing that we move to a multi-phase approach with the bundle deployments. So the first phase would be unpacking content from one or more sources. This expands the current API's ability to unpack from one and only one source to many. And then after unpacking, we would, in the future, potentially do Go templating, customize, Helm templating, whatever we may decide to put in for step 2. And then the final step would be applying content to the cluster. But this is just intermediary, where it would let us have multiple sources, and then we would say potentially what format the sources are coming from. And we may change this a little bit as folks have a chance to look at it and discuss, but that's the summary for the time being.
Awesome. This looks really cool. I'm excited to see some new stuff coming out for Ruck back here. Does anybody have any comments here at the moment? Or all right, thanks for sharing, Andy. It's really cool. All right. Steve, I see a couple things here from you.
Yeah, 2 small things. So the first one, we would like to enable an operating mode for OLM v0 where catalogs don't use the OPM that's embedded in a catalog index image, but instead use like a well-known OPM instead. It's more tied to the platform version. There's some questions in here about version skew between OPM itself and the FBC data. I don't know enough about FBC and the constraints that we've imposed on it to be confident about the version matrix here. So still looking for more feedback here on what we can do to be confident we're not going to serve the wrong data.
Joe, I see your hand up.
Yep. I am definitely behind this proposal. I think, Steve, the thing we should probably try to figure out is like, what is our FBC spec, and stick to that essentially, right? So like, make that the thing that we say is needs to be backwards compatible when we change OPM serve to do stuff. And maybe we can ratchet in certain ways based on image labels or contents of what's in the FBC or something like that. But in general, I guess I expect FBC to be backwards compatible, but not necessarily forwards compatible. So we need to figure out, like, if you use a newer FBC with an older OPM, you wouldn't expect that to work, but that's sort of standard, so it seems fine. I don't know, how's that? I don't know if you want to discuss it right here, right now, but that's sort of my inclination.
Yeah, I mean, we've got folks that have opinions. We can certainly talk here. The only downside with what you suggested is if we're shipping new catalog indices out of band, we just have to be careful not to introduce like forward-looking FBC version stuff inside of a stream, right? Because it won't be represented by an older OPM. I also commented in there about, like, we could try to do some sort of runtime validation and fail back to using the OPM that's actually in the image. not opposed to that as well. In the happy path, we should be able to have the optimization. But yeah.
I saw that. I personally kind of feel like if you know that you've got some stuff that's not going to be compatible with the OPM that the cluster provides, then it's on you not to create a catalog source that uses the new API.
I'm just thinking the people making the catalog source are usually different from the people that are actually making the indices, right? And what's to say that somebody who runs a build pipeline that creates an index isn't just pulling in newer OPM versions when they're creating it? And then if that's shipped to a cluster that has a catalog source that's sufficiently old, as just picking up new versions as necessary, it would have a pretty old OPM.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ideally there's tests that happen when you update a catalog image before it gets pushed out. So I would hope that we would catch that before.
Okay.
That's the thing. But I agree, like that's something we need to at least say what our opinion is on how that should work.
Yeah, and mostly I just didn't know if that would be like onerous or difficult or impossible to say, hey, within these bounds, the version of FPC data we're using will not change. If that's true and that's easy to do, then I think, implementing this is pretty straightforward.
I think it is gonna, like, I think that is an important consideration because I think there's this thought among operator authors that it doesn't really matter which version of a cluster they're shipping their bundles to. It could be, Kubernetes 121 with an old version of OPM. It could be Kubernetes 127 or 8 with a new version of OPM, and they want their FBC to look homogeneous across all of them. And the implication is, well, then that means that you need to use the lowest common denominator FBC schema that's supported across all the different places that you intend to ship that FBC. I personally think that's just what we say. But I guess like maybe that's another thing to debate as well.
That seems reasonable to me, especially because, like, hypothetically, if there's a new version or new field or something in FBC that I want to make use of, that's only useful to me in as much as OLM itself can do something with that. So if I'm installing onto a place that has an older OLM that doesn't know anything about what I'm just adding, then it's kind of moot anyway. So I think the lowest common denominator approach is required kind of without this proposal.
Without like, okay, well, if you want to use that new feature in 127 plus, then cool, you can, but now you've got a different catalog essentially.
Sure, yeah, it's just not going to be homogeneous.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, if we're happy with that approach, I could certainly move forward with the implementation here, and we can just put all the necessary verbiage in the documentation for what's expected. But yeah, I'll keep the issue open. If anyone else has thoughts, chime in.
Cool. Thanks for bringing this up, Steve.
And then the second one that I had came up just recently. And I figured it might just be worth a higher bandwidth conversation. Is there a so the context here is today catalog index images can contain arbitrary data that just happens to be ignored by the catalog itself. And if we were to tightly constrain the contents of the catalog index to only be the catalog, we can start making some more assumptions on those contents when we're serving them. And I just wanted to clarify if there were any like blocking concerns on removing those in a future version of OPM, given that users would have that data in their images today, even though it wouldn't be germane to the index at all.
I don't think there are any use cases, and maybe anybody else here can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there are any use cases for putting .index ignore and the associated ignored files in the actual catalog image that ends up being the catalog source. To me, that's more of a, here's a nice thing to put in your source so that you can do some other stuff. But at the end of the day, you probably don't even want to push those things and incur the cost of bandwidth and everything for getting those things into your registry or out of the registry when we're downloading it. And then on the flip side, Steve, I think as you're alluding to, like there's also a cost in trying to ignore those on the read side as well. So like now we've got to do all the extra processing and read the index ignore files, when if we had some better guarantees, we could just concatenate everything together and call it a day and be a lot more performant. So I think the answer to your question is like, no, I think if we want to, there's no reason not to go ahead and pre-strip all of the ignored files and make the stuff that ends up in the image a lot more performant.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so just to be clear, so you're just talking about things that are other files, not things that are part of the meta object, right? So the
Right.
meta objects will still be serializable and so forth.
It would essentially boil down, yes, it would essentially boil down to, if you have an index ignore file, then the proposal is that something before you push would understand your index ignore files and automatically remove stuff from your FBC while it's being pushed or before it's being pushed to the registry, such that you end up with just FBC in that file tree.
Yep,
And that
good.
would include arbitrary metas that we don't necessarily know about in the core OLM side of things.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I just wanted to make sure because we are absolutely using those meta objects for storing other data in the catalog, and we needed to flow through.
Yeah. So this would basically say like you're only going to get what's valid FBC in the image, but it could be any meta objects. So yeah, I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, so we had an example that we had early on for FBC where we were using the index ignore just so that we could not generate an error when we were processing an owner's file for the fragment that got promoted to another repository. But I think that's a pretty edge case, and that we could absolutely find other ways to do that.
Sorry, could
But-
you restate that, Jordan? I don't think I caught that.
Oh, it's just that the only, I was looking for examples of where we might be using an index ignore in something that was a live catalog contribution. And we had one case that I could find readily, and since this issue is new to me as of this morning, and that was just for the case, like we have these two Git repos that we've modeled as kind of the left-hand, right-hand side of interaction between an operator, author, and a catalog, a destination catalog. And in the operator author version of this, which is the example operator index repo under operator framework, we were definitely using index ignore to not error out on the owner's file, but also allow that fragment to go to another repo in a way that would preserve ownership. And I'm just pointing out that that being the only example I can find of it, I don't think that we have any strong dependency on this mechanism for anything. So like, for example, it seems pretty natural that we could introduce a flag to OPM verify that would disable the index ignore model there. So we could have a variant of the function that would validate your tree, but then the new variant would validate it as if it were a contribution and be more strict about enforcing these guidelines. No extraneous data.
Jordan, in that case, is the transport mechanism between the contributor repo and the catalog of catalogs repo, is it an image?
No, in this case, it's actually, it's not an image.
Okay.
That actually uses GitHub automation to open a PR on the destination repo.
Got it. So I think what we're suggesting here is it's only when you actually go and build the catalog image is when this would matter, right? So like if you wanted to open a PR in another repo where you contribute a fragment of the larger catalog that has an owner's file in it, that's totally fine. But then when that catalog actually gets built, then that's when you'd say like, okay, let's look at all the index ignore files and strip out all the owners.
Right, no, absolutely. That's in line with what I'm thinking as well, if I'm not expressing it as well.
Cool.
That's all I had. Thanks, folks.
Awesome. So we've got our milestone check-ins remaining. We were going to skip Ruckpack and Deppy. I'll just check in on catalog D here first. I see both of these open. I assume we're just on this one at the moment, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, I wasn't able to attend this last week. So if this is information being reiterated, I apologize. But essentially, the last time we checked in, we had a bunch of issues in this 0.6.0 milestone. But then we've decided to split that up into 0.6.0 and 0.7.0. So what you see in there, for the first issues, there's already a PR that's very close to merging. So once that closes, I think 50% will be done, and the others are in progress. I
Great.
think that's the update. Yep.
Cool. Is it worth looking at 7 or? I assume this is probably in a less in progress state.
Yes. So we are focusing on 0.6.0.
Yeah. Cool. And then we have operator controller. Got a few issues here. Todd and I have been working on the version ranges stuff. I closed one issue last week. Todd, did you have anything you wanted to say on the other issues here?
No, but the only thing is there's a we still have one more thing which we'll maybe try to get in, but there's interdependency between the regex and actually introducing mastermind semver.
Okay. Gotcha.
Hey, Todd, on that question, are you referring to the question I had in the regex PR about
Yes.
holding that?
Yes.
So you're thinking, let's hold that regex open until we get the mastermind stuff in?
Well, part of the problem is it's hard to test the mastermind stuff without the regex update.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of like this catch-22. So
yeah, I'm not necessarily. I just wanted to Daniel, can you open 345, or maybe it's the PR associated with 345?
yeah, I mean, we could put in the regex and fail on the reconcile, which wouldn't be too bad.
Right. I'm not opposed to that. Like, if you think that's a reasonable way to unblock yourself, that seems reasonable, especially if we have a PR basically ready to go that does the masterminds switch over to.
Yeah, the masterminds might need to include this commit to at least do some of its testing, and then this could then, once this is merged, that other commit would fall out. So
yep, that works.
Cool. And Alex, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and I was just gonna, it's more related to the milestone than this issue itself, but there's some bundle deployment health that has been, the RFC has been translated into GitHub issues, and depending on people picking them up, they'll probably be pulled into this as well.
Sounds good. Then we have next idea generation, milestone idea generation check-in. I looked at this earlier and it was empty, so unless I'm missing something here, that probably nothing to bring up. And if that is the case, then I'm gonna get started making the next meeting agenda, and wanted to ask also if anybody wanted to volunteer to run the meeting next week.
I'd like to have a go at it.
Awesome. Thanks, Aki. Then if
Quick
there's
comment
nothing else,
on
yes,
that.
Alex.
So the GitHub discussion that we just closed actually doesn't have the milestone check-in anymore. Or sorry, not the milestone check-in, the next milestone idea generation check-in. So I had meant to remove that. I did not, but I just wanted to call out that we're not doing that. I think the idea was that we'd be more self-governed between the projects and just make sure that by looking at the milestones and seeing it empty, it would drive that project to create issues in their milestone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
thanks for clarifying that. And yeah, so unless there's anything else anybody wanted to bring up, I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting. All right, thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next week.
thanks, Daniel.